You're listening to Beyond the Endpoint, a podcast from the Duke Clinical Research Institute. In this series, we're demystifying clinical research and answering your pressing questions about health and healthcare. You can find our full episodes at dcri.org/BTE.
From personalizing treatment plans with remarkable precision to transforming how the future generation of physicians are educated, many believe artificial intelligence could be one of the most transformative forces in modern healthcare. As AI continues to reshape the existing realities of nearly every aspect of our world, the field of medicine and healthcare delivery is certainly no exception. I'm Dr. Emily O'Brien, a population health researcher at the Duke Clinical Research Institute. I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Manesh Patel, head of cardiology at Duke Medicine and a DCRI faculty member.
Thanks, Emily. There's still so much uncertainty surrounding AI. But because the technology is evolving so quickly, I feel like some of the questions we're asking today could have answers in the very near future. That's why we want to set the stage for where the field stands now and get a clearer sense of where it's headed.
We're joined today by two longtime Duke School of Medicine collaborators, Dr. Michael Pencina and Suresh Balu, both recognized leaders in ethical and innovative uses of AI in healthcare. Michael is the former Vice Dean for Data Science and recently transitioned to United Health Group as their Chief AI Scientist. Suresh is the Associate Dean for Innovation and Partnership, as well as Program Director of the Duke Institute for Health Innovation. Michael and Suresh, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
This sounds simple, but maybe we should just start by, what is AI? I'm just going to start with the usual, it can mean so many different things to so many people. So if you were describing it to your teenager, what would you say?
I would say it's a field of computer science that is focused on creating agents, intelligent agents that can learn from data and experience being human experience, right? These agents achieve this typically by processing large amounts of data sets and identifying specifically the patterns and relationship between those type of data elements. That's what it does. But the notion is the learned patterns will allow the AI to perform tasks specifically requiring, I would say, human intelligence, something like diagnosis, decision-making, and creative problem solving.
Can you walk us through how AI is being used in healthcare and medicine, sort of what the common ways are that we might see this deployed?
I see three basic buckets of application. One is basic research and discovery, one is clinical application, and one is clinical operations application. So the patient comes with persistent cough, sits with the doctor having a conversation, and there is recognition software listening to it. So the doctor doesn't have to be typing as they are having the conversation, and the note will be created at the end of the visit for the doctor to approve and share with the patient, right? So that's the operational. Say during the conversation, the doctor decides the patient needs some kind of x-ray or some kind of imaging procedure to look at their lungs. That's performed, and it can be sent to radiologist, or it's radiologist augmented within an AI algorithm which discovers abnormalities or rules out abnormalities in the patient. That's the clinical diagnostic application. And then at the end, we're not quite there yet, but moving there quickly, the doctor prescribes medication for the patient. Well, the medication was discovered because AI was used in protein cell modeling in drug discovery. So those are the three kind of basic components. Some of them were closer than others in applications, both at Duke or on a broader scale, but that's what we have. Now, in a few years, will the patient be talking to an AI bot instead of the doctor? Maybe.
Yeah, it's probably a good time for me to come in because that's an exciting and scary concept. One of the things people talk about a lot is the human in the loop. And I do think there'll be a world, because we don't have enough people helping care for patients, where there'll have to be more and more, I'll call them digital or automated interactions. I think the keys will be, and maybe this will be part of what we talk about next, is how do we get there? Because there's a lot of promise and there's a lot of hype of what's really used, right? And even in the best of technologies, I'll use the ambient listening that you guys described. So at our institution and others, and I use it in my clinic. I push a button on my iPhone while I talk to my patients. They really enjoy doctors that look at them and get to spend time. I enjoy the fact that the note is being transcribed pretty well, so my day gets a little easier. So those are really good features. I do ask them, is it okay if I push this button? And this helps me with my note. And I do know that they're probably thinking a little bit like, where will all that information go? But at the end of the day, I think people come to see clinicians and they have information that we don't always have. I see the big opportunity of all the data that people have on their phones or life and things that we could be using to better think about the therapies they need. And it might make sure that we think about diagnoses and use medicines better or don't have interactions. So all of those are really huge promises for AI. What are your thoughts on how we get, the requisite evidence and safety to put into practice for some of these tools?
Right. So I would say my thinking evolved or is evolving on the topic. Probably a few years ago, the concept of a bot replacing a function of a physician in some form, I would reject it outright and say that's not happening. And so where my thinking has evolved was from kind of saying categorical no to that concept, moving it into the question, okay, show me the evidence that this approach would be beneficial for the patient, right? Could I imagine myself interacting with a bot and receiving the same benefit I'm receiving from a physician? And I will say, in many instances, still no. Now, I'm aware of companies that are trying to do it, right, for blood pressure monitoring and auto prescription and so on. And where I get to it is evidence, right? And I think in the paper that the three of us published, we talk about standards of evidence for pharmaceuticals, for devices, based on years of experience and really well designed experiments, right? Clinical trials that enable testing of these products. In AI, we don't have that. Now, we can argue we don't need that, the same level of hard evidence for every AI solution, but in a risk-based framework, we do need it for some. The added layer or the other added problem is, even if we conduct a clinical trial of an AI agent that adapts over time, the results we get today may not be the same as the results we get when the agent is used in clinical practice. And it might be that the agent learns something or deteriorates, or the doctor interacting with the agent becomes more complacent over time. So it's the evidence generation pre-market, but also post-market, right? It's the monitoring and surveillance becoming so absolutely critical. But to finish my thought, if I see the evidence that the technology is better than the human physician and remains better, I would have a hard time to argue against using it.
There's definitely this sort of black box concern I think that a lot of people have about this. So when you think about the evidence that we need as a health system to adopt something that has AI as a foundation, or regulatory agencies evaluating evidence that has been generated in part with the use of AI, how do they confront this black box problem? Does it bother people? Are people kind of okay with the fact that it's not so easy to look under the hood here?
The outcome that is of interest, I think making sure that there is continuous monitoring. I think part of it is trust, development of trust, both from the standpoint of the clinicians who are using it and at the same time from a patient perspective as well. So we'll have to look at how we build trust, and that has to happen through transparency. And what are the best practices in terms of communicating the model performance, how to put that into practice? I think those are factors that we have to fully develop and put that into practice on a regular basis. We have developed something like a model fact card, which would help push those particular pieces. It has to happen all the way from early stages of model development all the way through full life cycle of the AI model, and focusing on continuous monitoring and building that infrastructure is going to be truly important for adoption of AI and the value of AI to be realized both by the clinicians by the health systems and by the patients. I think that's the only way that we can see this getting deployed broadly.
I think there are things that will require regulatory evidence base and evaluation, and there are going to be things that aren't, right? And so if we had a scheduling system like Open Table and it got patients to the clinics easier and they, AI helped us get to the right table and right office, then I don't think people would get too complicated with saying, hey, I need to see better evidence. I'll just know because I got to see the doctor that I wanted to see in time and they got faster. But to prescribe an antibiotic or to do a test or refer a physician or order a procedure, some of the things that are tied to medical license and clinical decision support, I suspect there's not only going to have to be evidence, but continuing evaluation. And I think that is going to be part of what we do over time to build trust. What about the consumerism of AI right now? The hype is big, and a lot of people are looking at all the things, whether it's in wearables or in models that you can log into and will tell you about your own health. How do you see that? Because, I see it twofold. One is training our community, but the second is to train the next generation of healthcare professionals who are going to be using these tools to understand how to evaluate them.
Consumerism of healthcare and AI is happening. And I think it is our responsibility, at least, to improve AI literacy among our patients and our community. I think making sure that we have a pathway for patients to get to the facts, the truth, the right information is going to be an important piece, and AI can play a huge role in that. Getting to the right information very, very quickly from authority is an important piece, along with, I would say, data privacy and security is going to be an important piece, because you don't want every piece of information from the patient to be dumped into the internet. So that's an aspect that we're allowed to play.
I'll share an anecdote from some 20 years ago where I was a mini-bot myself, right? So during her first pregnancy, my wife was having recurrent urinary tract infections, and we're both very worried, right? And I ended up working in the medical profession. I've done all the research and started questioning her OBGYN about the best medications, best antibiotics for UTIs and pregnancy. And the poor doctor, that he has not done all the reading that I've done, right? It wasn't kind of his quite specialty. He got so frustrated with me. He said, well, there needs to be some trust here. And I said, you're right. And I don't quite have it, because I feel I know more than you do at this point, right? We ended up going to an ID doctor who was wonderful and what we needed at the time. But these kind of mini bot patients with AI, every patient is empowered to do it, right? It's not only I now who go and read all these things that GPT or another chatbot can give me. Patients have that. And I really feel for the clinicians having to deal with it, because it's almost impossible, right, to acquire all this knowledge. And now you have patients who will be questioning you all the time. What do we do with that? I think the physician-patient interaction is being changed irreversibly, right? And it's a challenge, and kind of getting more into the humanistic aspects of the AI, right? This guy kind of said, I'd be willing to accept a good bot for some things, and some things definitely not. I think we also need to recognize the human-to-human component, the practice of medicine, which AI will never replace, right? We've read the papers where blinded patients said that the AI was more empathetic than the doctor in their responses. Well, after you told the patients it was AI, I would presume the empathy would not matter, because empathy from a bot has no value to me.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think about that sometimes when I'm answering my in-basket messages, and I realize that it's probably related to my ability to be empathetic with short form. And I think you're right that there are ways in which I think there's going to be value added. And I don't think it's either or, right? You can imagine that it's an assisted tool for people to deliver care. But one thing you were saying, Michael, kind of struck me, and be interested in as we sort of round out our conversation, because there's the promise of AI. There's actually the opportunity. And I would say healthcare is one of the largest opportunities for AI, because AI in general is an opportunity to take a lot of information. Healthcare might account for, in some estimates, up to a third of all information on planet Earth, and growing with these wearables. And that's before we get to DNA and other information people will have about themselves. So it's to take a bunch of information that might be personalizable and actually get insights to help you care for yourself or others. So, healthcare is in certainly the middle of where I would say the sweet spot of information technologies. The problem I'm struggling with is your mini bot comment, which I think is so real, which is that I'm in clinic a lot, and a lot of people come in and tell me they've done research, which is good. I want them to do research. And the bots now do research too, or you could do it, but it can only do research on what's published or on the internet or all that information. And I'll give you my example of that is that statin intolerance seems to be a very common thing talked about on the internet and the data and conversation. But when you go back to ground source truth and placebo-controlled blinded studies, the rate of statin intolerance may not be as high as it's perceived in practice. So it's a really complicated thing to solve. Emily, you've thought a lot about this. I'd be interested what your thoughts are on some of these kinds of things.
Manesh, I think you saved this one as we're sort of getting to the end because you knew I would go off on my soapbox here. But here's my question, and maybe Michael and Suresh can help me with this. As we know, there's lots of information on the internet, and anybody can build one of these models with enough computing power, right? And they can train that model to perform in a certain way. Right now, you look at the governance and the oversight and the ownership of these models, and who is in those roles of sort of providing that oversight? CEOs, right, of private companies. They're responsible for overseeing the training and making sure that, the model produces accurate information. I'm terrified by this just because, there are values within that organization that are driving the model output, but those are not always apparent to the user. And I know we're getting a little far afield of healthcare, but I do think at some point we have to accept that the information that a patient might bring to your office to talk with you, like it could be from truly any model out there, right? And there may be very confident framing of things that are not actually true, as we've seen in many other domains. And that's really allowed, misinformation to kind of take hold. Can you calm me down about this? Tell me why I should relax about so much power kind of being in the hands of few and the potential to create something that really could do a lot of harm if not appropriately managed.
I can say you can rest assured that before any of those algorithms are used at Duke, it will go through our ABCDS algorithm-based clinical decision support governance, right? And hopefully we will.
I like that plug.
Yeah. Hopefully we will identify problems with it. But on the general patient use level, it gets very complicated very quickly. And I've seen people taking large databases and asking AI agents research questions and producing a scientific paper. I have no idea how good that evidence or that paper is, but it's definitely possible to start with a question, a database, and have a paper written which looks like anything you see in the major journals. So without assessment and evaluation of performance of these tools and monitoring, like we're saying, I think there is really no way to know what they are bringing about. And that's why what worries me the most is that the development and the zeal to build new algorithms is much more than the zeal to build assessment, monitoring, and surveillance tools that go with these algorithms.
My comment, Emily, should you be worried? The answer is yes. The foundational models, at least, they're going to develop whatever they're going to develop, especially with the limited regulation that is in place. How we use it for the point solutions that we are trying to do, we can put some guardrails and make sure that it is absolutely going to work for our set of use cases. And any healthcare delivery organization should have a local validation and what are the best practices. I think those things can be absolutely put in place so that we can be sure that the results have the appropriate performance before it's going to be used by any clinician. But the cat is out of the bag for it to be used by consumers. There is no way you can control that. The only way that can be done is through appropriate regulation and having ethical frameworks for development of the model and how things should be used. I think that's why AI literacy is going to play a huge role in the consumerization of healthcare or for any other use case. I would say that we all should be worried. It's not about what information is provided to us. What information is not provided to us is also an important piece. So we should be very vigilant going forward when we start using AI.
Yeah, no, those are good points. And, I guess as we round out the conversation, I might say, obviously, we believe strongly that people own their own health data, and we have to think through that as we interact with it. there's clearly regulatory oversight for these agents or AI tools that are softwares that are used as medical devices, but those that aren't obviously are important. What I've said before about AI, which is interesting to me, is that the regulatory components are to treat it like a medical device, but the use cases are like pharmacotherapies, broad and wide, with lots of on and off label use. So I would just say those are some real struggling points. Well, Suresh and Michael, thank you guys for joining us so much. I mean, we could go on for a long time about AI because there's so much to cover, but really appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Beyond the Endpoint.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all.
This is Beyond the Endpoint, a podcast where we bring personal and expert perspectives on healthcare and clinical research to the casual listener. Stay tuned after the interview for a breakdown with the hosts. They'll talk through key takeaways and what this week's topic means for you.
Well, wow, Emily, that was like kind of a deep episode on AI, which you can imagine, because I do think we got a lot of kind of insights on where it's going. We spent a little time on it, but the line where AI and humans sort of starts to get blurred and you don't know how to keep the human in the loop, whether it's in science or in clinical care or in the research. We talked a little bit about it, but I wonder what your thoughts were on the episode as we got into some of those kind of, I'll call it, ethical areas.
Yeah, so I think this is such an important point, and it kind of touches on one of my big takeaways from the discussion, which is, we say things like AI in medicine, or let's do research on AI in clinical care. And like, it's so vast and so broad that it's hard to get your hands around what is meant by that. So I just really appreciated Michael and Suresh taking the time to like walk us through exactly where AI is showing up now and where they see kind of the most promise, because it's not all the same. And then at the same time, when we think about the risks and benefits, we need to talk about those in the context of how it's being used, right? So like very different risks for, say, the use of AI to generate some clinical prediction score that might guide a treatment decision where the data stays within the system versus someone who's using ChatGPT on their own to learn about a condition or a treatment and like bringing that into the clinic and, wanting feedback on that, and the clinician maybe not knowing how reliable the model is and needing to double check all the information and potentially fight some misinformation. So I feel like at some point we have got to hold ourselves accountable and being really specific about what we're talking about when we talk about AI in medicine. And so I see this really as just a starting point, and we're likely going to have many future discussions about this, which I think will become richer with time, because right now there just are so many unknowns about kind of what's coming and whether some of these theoretical risks will show up.
We've crossed the threshold now, I would say, where whether it's these large language models or others, where the computer is generating, or the algorithm's generating new information, whether it's, telling me the answer to a question I've asked, or sometimes it's learning at a speed that we can't. And so I do think for AI in medicine, there's both the ethical thing, but the takeaway I got is the speed of the change that's happening. We're on definitely the big slope of the curve where we're going to have these things that start to happen a lot faster, because I think the technology is moving in. So not to be too cliche for medicine, putting up ways in which we can definitely evaluate it, make sure we understand the benefits. My take home is it's here to stay. It's only going to get better. And our opportunity in medicine, and actually in a lot of industries, is to live in the, I'll call it the in-between space, translating or at least understanding how we want the output so that it can actually be understood and potentially change what we do. And then how do we hold that accountable, test it to make sure that it's not, as they say, hallucinating, making up new information that's not real and maybe hurting the way we care for patients. Any final thoughts from you, Emily, around that space?
Just that, it was nice to hear kind of the healthy skepticism, but cautious optimism. I feel like Michael and Suresh and other leaders here at Duke have done a nice job of not being too wet blanket and thinking that this is going to destroy our whole clinical care enterprise or research enterprise, but also not saying this is going to fix every problem. We've seen technologies that have been super hyped. We thought the electronic health record was going to change everything, make everything way better. And, that we know that we have not reached that goal yet, let's just say. I think there's hope, but also awareness that, as you say, this is super evolving and dynamic. So I don't know, maybe the next generation will do a wonderful job of kind of leading in this space where AI is used in all sorts of ways in medicine, but doing it in a way that kind of maintains that distance between the human and the tech in a way that is healthy and kind of recognizes the unique contributions, important contributions of each.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we end this episode, I'll just say what I tell our fellows, faculty, residents, and even patients who ask us, I don't see AI replacing clinicians, physicians, but I do think clinicians and physicians who know how to use AI will replace those who don't, just like any other tool. And so whether it's an AI tool or a web-based tool or understanding evidence-based medicine, those that do it well will replace those that are not willing to change and adapt or learn.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Beyond the Endpoint. As always, we encourage you to share your thoughts or topic recommendations by emailing us at beyondtheendpoint@duke.edu.
Yeah, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on SoundCloud, Spotify, Amazon Music, or Apple Podcasts. You can also connect with the Duke Clinical Research Institute on LinkedIn or by following @DCRI News on X and Blue Sky. See you next time.
This has been Beyond the Endpoint. Resources related to this episode are available on dcri.org/BTE. If you have any burning questions about clinical research or healthcare, drop us a line at beyondtheendpoint@duke.edu. We'd love to address your questions in a future episode.